This is Karis Alexander with Deep Truth Media. Always remember that I share a perspective based on the perception of where I'm at in the evolutionary trajectory that I'm on. Now, whoever controls your history controls your consciousness and your Kundalini. Therefore, you must become the master controller of your consciousness. The title of the sharing is Deconstructing Consciousness. Astral Worship equals Astrology. Pope Francis equals Ophiuchus, the Serpent holder, which equals the secrets of Kundalini. While it is true the modern astronomy has superseded the ancient system of astrology, and while people have ceased to believe that the stars are intervening in mundane affairs, nothing could be further from the truth. The ancient erroneous system of nature, called Astrology, was ultimately perpetuated under the name of Christianity, and it turns out that the Christendom dominated as much of these fallacies as were our pagan ancestry, the only difference being a change of name. The dogmatic element of religion, which was anciently designated as astrology, is now known as theology. All the evidences bearing upon the subject indicate that the founders of the primary form of religion were a sect of philosophers known as Magi, or wise men of the Aryan race or of Central Asia, who, having lived ages before any conception of the supernatural had obtained in the world, and speculating to the relative beginnings of things, were necessarily confined to the contemplation and study of nature, the elements of which they believed to be self-existent and endless in duration. But being wholly without knowledge of her inherent forces, they explained the manifold processes by conceiving the idea that she was animated by a great inherent soul or spirit, emanations from which impressed all her parts with life and motion, thus endowing man and other animals with souls emanating alike from the imaginary great soul of nature. They believed this precast, these magi, and taught that immediately after death all souls were absorbed into the source, whereas the dewdrop slips into the shining sea, all personal identity was forever lost. Hence we see that although recognizing the soul as immortal, considering it not as an entity existing independent of matter, but as the spirit of matter itself, the primary religion of Christendom was the exponent of the purest form of materialism. You see, they had to get you to believe in sin, the act of sin, and the idea that you come back, you reincarnate into this system of consciousness in order to have you feel guilty if you committed sin within this system of materialism. If they had you believing, as is true, that you transcend the system of consciousness upon death, forever, never incarnating back into this system, then you would not feel guilty about committing sin within the system of materialism. See how you're being conned. Being the astronomers of their day and mistaking the apparent for the real, the ancient magi constructed the system of nature known as the geocentric, and in conformity thereto composed a collection of astronomical allegories in which the emanations from the imaginary great soul of nature, by which they believed all materialities were impressed with life and motion, were personified and made to play their respective part. Basing the religion they instituted upon their system of allegorical astronomy and making it its personification the objects of worship, they thus originated the anthropomorphic or man-like God, and claiming have composed them under the inspiration of these self-same divinities. They designated them as sacred records or scriptures and taught the ignorant masses that they were literal histories and their personifications real personages who, having once lived upon the earth and for the good of mankind performed the wondrous works imputed to them, were then in heaven whence they came. If you would like to read more on the topic of astral worship, I encourage you to read a short article by J.H. Hill called Astral Worship. It's well worth your time. And another book is Anacalypsis by Godfrey Higgins. It is important to note that in studying the primitive forms of religion, it will be found that none of them taught anything relative to a future life, for the simple reason that their founders had no conception of such a state. And as you continue to synthesize this information, remember that whoever controls your history controls your consciousness and your Kundalini. Therefore, you must what? Become the master controller of your consciousness. Now, it turns out that Pope Francis bears an Ophiuchus Serpent holder date of birth, being born on the cusp date, just like our Prince George during the Star of David alignment in 2013. Now, for those of you who don't know, in astrology, when your birthday falls on the day when the sun changes from one sign to the next in the 24-hour space of time in which you were born on the cusp. As a Jesuit, Pope Francis, it happens, there is another Saint Francis on the books of the church, that is Francis Xavier, the co-founder of the Jesuit order. Just making a simple connection here. Pope Francis' December 17th birthday in 1936, when he was born, the sun was in Ophiuchus in the morning, and by noon it was on the boundary of the constellation Sagittarius. Now, the Pope's birthday in 1936 postdates the official creation of constellation Ophiuchus by the 6 years in 1930. This means Ophiuchus was a bona fide member of the exclusive brotherhood of zodiac constellations by the time the future Ophiuchus Pope's feet hit the ground. This is not a coincidence, but an opportunity to see how certain individuals were born for the positions and characters they play on the world stage. So who now symbolically Pope Francis represents is a serpent holder, none other than the Vatican. The serpent holder is none other than the Vatican, that is the holder, the container of your Kundalini. Now, for those who are new to Kundalini, it is a Sanskrit word that means coil. Every human being has Kundalini. However, in most humans, the Kundalini lies dormant in the perineum, forming a 3.5 circles coil, as the power control force keep most of humanity sequestered in the reptilian brain or the R complex through fear, negativity, fixation on materialism, while suppressing their consciousness upon which their perceptions and beliefs have been conditioned by culture. Although most people are not aware that the Kundalini exists, Kundalini is well known by serious spiritual seekers, and with the increase of solar activity bombarding our earth plane, people will be experiencing this Shiva Shakti force, whether they understand it or not, whether they are prepared for it or not. Kundalini is one form of this subtle energy force that we must come to better understand and absorb into our individual and collective transformation, as Kundalini experience is becoming a way of life for many, whether they realize it or not. Would you agree that the spinal column looks like a snake or a serpent? I show a picture in the article. Now, who is seen holding the serpent or snake is none other than Ophiuchus. Now, could that staff the Pope always holds is a reference to the spinal column and who controls your Kundalini? Now, the Kundalini is said to represent the serpent energy. That being said, I don't believe that is the case. I believe the power control force control the Kundalini by the fact that we live in a sea of serpent energy, and that the Kundalini fire is what purifies the spinal column and your chakra system of the serpentine energy or parasitic low vibratory energy, which includes negative energies and psychological trauma. I have come to realize that different personalities exist when it comes to Kundalini activation. As a result, although there is a general goal to be accomplished, given the difference of personalities, not to mention the various degrees of pathology, the approaches to Kundalini activation or ascension will vary from person to person. This is how the power control force are controlling your consciousness through their serpent tubes or serpent energy, as I show in this picture. The personality is an indication of habituation, a habitual mode of thinking, feeling, and acting that more often than not rests on an early experience of psychological trauma. These factors must be considered in the process of true alchemy. Alchemy is a healing process. Therefore, while it's easy to say that we must use our free will to connect to the source of all, I believe it is more responsible to share a safe and effective methodology, especially when attempting to help people. This is why I say that you must do the core theme work, that is, clear the negative energies off your chakra system in order to prepare the vehicle, in order to absorb these frequency of high catalytic energy. It turns out that St. Francis of Assisi, just another reference to Pope Francis, was a heart chakra activated individual. Nothing about Kundalini is common, but heart chakra Kundalini activations are even more rare than spinal sweep activations, as they are an embodiment of a divine expression of love, an intention of love inside a human upon the physical plane. These people become centers of attraction, of kindness, if they are able to transcend the fear of being different in society. An activation of the heart chakra as a solo point of activation spreading out in spiral formation and incurring the full activation is another expression of Kundalini activation format. This is different than the heart chakra orgasms, which is a burst of Kundalini into the cardiac matrix, causing an intensity of joy and bliss for a moment. It is true that Kundalini requires years to cleanse, open, and develop a chakra completely. I totally understand this, as I've been having these Kundalini experience since 2006. And the process is done from the base chakra upwards in sequential order. So as the Kundalini starts at the lowest chakra and spends a few years in this base chakra, it can take decades before the Kundalini can start working upon the crown chakra, the seventh chakra. In most cases, one will die before achieving the final goal of the process, since time is required is sometimes too long. That being said, with the changes taking place on the planetary level, many will be able to reach full ascension in physical form in this lifetime. It is important to note that even if the Kundalini reaches the crown, although wonderful, it is just the beginning of the real journey of the Kundalini activation and your ascension or transcendence out of the system of consciousness. You transcend the system of consciousness through the heart chakra. I keep telling you that. That being said, that is my experience. Therefore, there are those who will share with you a different experience of their own transcendence. Does that mean that as you reach higher and higher states of consciousness through the Kundalini activation in the crown chakra, that is the ultimate enlightenment? No. If you only go that far, you are only allowing yourself to be what? Recycled back into the system of consciousness. I thank you so much for tuning in.